Night school.
Night school.
So somebody from church loaned me this book, How to Change Your Mind. You were there when it was loaned to me.
I was.
I think she hadn't read it. But she's a geologist and just open-minded about learning stuff like this. And we had, at church, we do a group called Theology and Film and Theology or something. It's not really a theology group. It's just like, let's watch interesting stuff and discuss it.
That sounds dope.
Yeah. And somebody submitted one of the new mushroom documentaries. So we ended up talking about psychedelics in the group. And then she told me that she had this book, but she hadn't read it yet, loaned it to me. And it is for people who are looking for a sound and broad introduction to the subject of psychedelics, really generally. Mm-hmm. I was hoping that it would give me more insights on how exactly psychedelic therapy is facilitated, because there's so much to be learned from that.
Like the actual process of like how they do the experiments, the controls and things like that.
Okay. Like if I ever had a friend who said, I need a psychedelic experience, I have no way to get one facilitated legally, officially, professionally, all that. Mm-hmm. Will you please sit for me? I would feel totally responsible to say, yeah, I'll sit for you. Let's do that. And just if I ever do a psychedelic journey again, how could I set it up to be maximally safe and beneficial? I was hoping for a little more of that. So anyone who's looking for something like that, go elsewhere. This is just like a broad general introduction. Some of the, it was history, it was science, it was mysticism, but only a sprinkle of each. Mm-hmm. One of the history pieces, and also I didn't take a lot of any notes on this book. I marked a couple of pages. I especially marked a graphic, but it reads like a novel. Like you just flow through it. I read it in 2 sittings, and it's a chonker. But I was doing a volunteer thing that required I just be present somewhere for like 8 hours straight. Mm-hmm. And so that was when I read most of it. And nice. I never had a problem just reading because he's weaving through different subjects. It's artistic, it's scientific, it's mystical, mm-hmm. it's exploratory, it's grounded. And so you never get bored.
Yeah, it's often not how nonfiction books are. It's more stop and start, more like this is a topic, this is a case that we're going to discuss, this is a case we're going to discuss.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's an amazing, I think you'd call that science journalism. He's amazing at it. And my favorite history pieces were he really emphasized how big psychedelic research was in, I believe it was and like I said, I didn't take notes because it was so entertaining. I never thought to take notes, mm-hmm. and I didn't want to taint the experience of reading the book by taking notes.
Sure.
So it's going to be a less fact-based episode and more just here's what I remember from it.
Cool.
But the history, psychedelic research, like the Harvard psychedelic group was huge. They were giving psychedelics to dozens and dozens of graduate students and low-key some undergraduate students at Harvard. And I understood the Harvard psychedelic group to be Andrew Weil, who went on to become a great physician and kind of a spiritual teacher as well, but his professional role being physician. Mm-hmm. And then Richard Alpert, who went on to study under a guru in India and rename himself Ram Dass and become strictly a new age, new thought kind of spiritual teacher. Not necessarily new because he was teaching yoga ideas, which are not new. And then was Tim. I know you know this one.
I want to say McVeigh because we just mentioned him, but it's not him.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll remember it in 2 seconds. Yeah. And then the other one was... That's so funny. I always know these. Andrew Weil, Richard Alpert. What the hell are
Tim
the other
Keller.
two?
That's an author, right?
Timothy Keller was a theologian that we covered,
right.
Or a philosopher. No, he was a theologian. Apologies. Anyway.
Timothy Acid.
Yeah. Timothy Leary. That actually reminded me.
Nice. Okay.
Timothy Acid actually drummed it up in my head.
All right, cool.
Timothy Leary. And one fourth dude, but that's fine that I don't remember the fourth dude's name because I just wanted to say that the way that I understood the story was that all 4 of those guys were like a private club that were doing psychedelics together mm-hmm. and debriefing it with each other. Really, it was Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary who were primarily facilitating these sessions. And then Andrew Weil was an undergrad student who went and asked them if he could be a part of it, and it had become really exclusive and cool, and it was almost like you're a dork if you haven't gone through the initiation. and he went and inquired about it. One of them was cool enough to tell him about a source where he could get safe and technically legal mescaline from some laboratory. Like, hey, you can just make an order from this lab and they'll send you mescaline. It's perfect. It's not sketchy, da-da-da. Well, he was so upset that they just made that recommendation to him and had allowed other undergraduate students low-key to participate that he went and snitched on them and pulled this like enormous bitch move.
Damn.
And was like, hey, you know, he gave me access to drugs. He let these other undergrads in. I think what they're doing is really wrong. And he helped to get that whole thing shut down. But it also got shut down because Timothy Leary had gone off the deep end into the kind of reckless manifestation of the jester archetype. Like, I'm going to mock academia and law and everything and everyone because this is the key and none of you have any clue. And so he just went way off the deep end like that. And like, there was one quote, he showed up to a hearing and they were deciding whether or not to let them continue with the research. And he said, LSD causes temporary distress, paranoia, and mania in people who have not tried it. Referring to
that's a good one.
How much these administrators were freaking out. He said that to the press. And so that was printed. So he's making these really flamboyant and kind of antagonistic comments.
Yeah.
And he's painting the whole thing like a manic shit show. And there was other guys like the Hoffman who synthesized LSD in like the 30s, and then it actually emerged, you know, a couple decades later. Mm-hmm. He was like, Timothy Leary, shut the fuck up. You're going to blow this for everybody. He privately mused to a friend about just taking Timothy Leary out, just killing him. Because he's like, I know how much of a positive impact this stuff can have, and I know that this arrogant asshole is going to ruin it. He's like, should we just get rid of him? And the guy who reported that Albert Hoffman had privately said that in the moment that Hoffman said that, he was afraid for his own life. They were tripping together when Hoffman said that. So Hoffman's on acid and this other dude's on acid, and Hoffman is like, I might need to kill Leary. I don't see any other way around it. And the guy's like, oh my God, are you going to kill me? So Hoffman
Makes
was
sense.
really measured and really well connected. And one of the other guys that emerged as a grounded guru of the psychedelic movements was Stan Groff. Stan Groff
that was who I was thinking might be the fourth member of that group.
No, he's fucking godfather. All of those are children compared to Stan Groff. Because as far as psychedelic research goes.
Gotcha.
Because Wheel, Alpert, Leary, and the fourth guy, would you mind just looking that up, Evan? The Harvard Psychedelic 4. We've got Andrew Wheel, Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and there's a fourth that we want to remember. Thanks, bro. Like looking at the research that Stan Groff has done into psychedelics, he facilitated many, many hundreds of sessions, and he had the government connects when it was shut down because Leary blew it to continue doing research anyway, because he knew somebody who knew somebody, and they were like, the FDA in one fell swoop shut down every single lab in the country doing psychedelic research except one, and that was Groff's lab. So the government understood there's one grown-up in this whole scene, and nobody's going to tell him what he can and can't do because he's a grown-up, and he knows somebody, and he helps somebody, and maybe there was powerful people. This is speculation, but I don't think it's speculation beyond how Pollan speculated. Maybe there were powerful people who really benefited from sessions, and that was a place that they could still go. Mm-hmm. So maybe it had to do with that, but Groff went on to map all the levels of consciousness that emerge in these psychedelic sessions and put a lot more work into putting out guides for how this can be done. And for Alpert and Leary and Wheel, it was like, look at these amazing insights we've gotten from it. And Stan Groff was like, I'm a psychiatrist. I'm going to map all of this, describe all of this. And he incorporated spiritual elements and stuff into it too. But Stan Groff was like one of the four... he's on the Mount Rushmore of transpersonal psychology, which is this new field that's integrating quantum physics and comparative mysticism and psychology and altered states of consciousness and hypnosis and dreams and and different ways of sleeping and out of body experiences and all this stuff. And Stan Groff really busted that open. So he was really the GOAT of psychedelic research. But Al Hoffman was another one of those guys who was really grounded and phenomenally well connected. He knew the politicians and he knew
Robert Thurman?
No. That's interesting. I thought Harvard Psychedelic 4 was like their general title. I guess that doesn't wield results. Are you looking on Bing?
No, I'm using Google.
That's your problem. Try Bing.
Yeah, I have to download it and install it.
Yeah, download the Yahoo app. And man, I'm just going to skip around to random insights. Like, one of the crazy things was in that movement in the 60s, there were so many experiments that happened that ended up laying the foundation of this world that we're living in. Like they did an experiment. If we give people what they called a creativity dose, which is 100 micrograms, so one tab, one light tab, because some tabs come 200, and we give it to like engineers and computer scientists and shit like that. It's a creativity dose. It'll stimulate them. It won't alter them to the point that they're away from consensus reality, but it'll alter the way they engage with consensus reality. Will they come up with different and novel ideas? And in one of those experiments, the computer mouse was invented. And there's this event. If somebody wants to look this up, like the greatest product unveiling of all time. It's like this guy announced like the computer mouse and like 4 other novel technologies that are now everyday parts of our world, all in this one super announcement. And he came up with all of these ideas in what was just an experiment to see what would happen if you gave 100 micrograms of LSD to a computer scientist. And also, we never would have discovered neurotransmitters without LSD research. And the discovery of neurotransmitters was the atom, the seed of the entire neuroscience field. There'd be no field of neuroscience if it wasn't for that LSD movement. And compared to like Silicon Valley would really not be a powerhouse without LSD. So many of those inventions came from LSD that it's like without LSD, pretty much no Silicon Valley, no neuroscience. All of that came out of LSD insights, which is interesting to contemplate, like how good and how bad those things are. Like,
right. Yeah. I mean, of course, it brings to mind American Cosmic, the idea from that, where most of the technology that we have is due to aliens or entities of some kind giving us information while we're in altered states. We're not coming up with these ideas of these devices. Instead, we're just going into an altered state to where they can reach out and go, here you go. And whether that thing is going to be good for us, whether this is a good entity giving us something that will help us to benefit the society, or whether this is something bad that is giving us something that it knows that we can't tell it's going to hurt us, but it's going to hurt us eventually. Yeah. It's hard to say which of those two things it is, but it brings to mind that idea. Like maybe it's not the drug, maybe it's the state that the drug puts you in and the things that are then able to give you information. It could be something like that.
Yeah. Well, this makes me curious to read the secret. I think it's the secret history of all ages, not the secret teachings of all ages, but the sacred history. Sacred History, something like that. I think it was Manly P. Hall. It was a book that he wrote that was about all of the supernatural interventions into human history and how they all guided human history along. And like consider that kind of thinking.
When you say interventions,
like angels showing up to people who really needed to do something. Like, this is a false example. This didn't happen, but an angel shows up to Albert Einstein and gives him E = MC squared. Like huge events like that, where it's like, oh, this clearly wouldn't have happened without this supernatural event. And it was understood that this supernatural event happened, but then history kind of just washed that reality away. And now we just think of it as something that happened. We don't think how it could have possibly happened.
Right.
But where I'm going with this train of thought is I'm trying not to see it in terms of there are good or bad entities that are giving us things, but just in terms of any time that novelty occurs, a venture into the unknown has happened. And life is this constant flip-flop between known and unknown, known, unknown, known, unknown. And so, yeah, every time we come up with something truly revolutionary, something supernatural happened by definition. If natural is what we understand, every time we step into what we don't understand, it is supernatural. And so it shouldn't be surprising in a sense. It is, but it shouldn't be. It's surprising to me, but it shouldn't be that LSD and talking to extraterrestrials psychically and angels showing up and providing direction, supernatural events like that are the reason that we step out into novelty. When you lay it out like that, it's obvious that that's the case, but it's so strange to encounter. And I really liked the way that Michael Pollan dealt with altered states in the book, because it's great for like my friend Brent, who is open to strangeness like that, but fundamentally pragmatic, conservative, and grounded. I can give this book to him, and he's never going to be reading it and go, wow, you just violated my trust by making a huge jump in logic and just going, I had this experience, so it's phenomenologically real. And this is like, if Brent read a book by Timothy Leary, he'd be like, God, I feel like this is loosening my grip, But this, he talks about the non-dual experience and how it occurs in psychedelic sessions, not as something phenomenologically, as in literally located somewhere real, but simply self-evidently epistemologically real. Epistemologically as in phenomenology is that which exists, and epistemology is the way that you know. And there is a way of knowing, there is a direct experience of non-duality that he gets glimpses of he did 3 psychedelic experiments as part of doing this book, this project. Double checking audio, looks fine. And actually the levels are off, but we can adjust them afterwards.
Sure.
I kept changing them and they were always wrong. So he describes those experiences, and he describes the fact that a lot of people have those experiences, but he doesn't opine about them or say, oh, they're just imagination. Oh, they are a literal phenomenological encounter with the divine. He just says that they are experiences.
Yeah.
So that's great. And I'm going to keep jumping around. So do you have any questions or comments right now? Because I'm going to just pick up a random other subject from the book.
I guess just that I like that sort of way at looking at things. I find myself less interested in pulling apart, is this, can I find secondhand accounts that, confirm this thing? It's not even just if somebody has an experience that's interesting, it's real to them, that's enough. I'm not always that interested in pulling apart, trying to figure out whether it is real or not, because what does that mean?
Right.
Yeah.
I was on the phone one time with our friend who had taken mushrooms and then walked by himself into the woods. And you and I were both on the phone with him.
Yeah.
But we were all tripping, but we were tripping together, so we felt fine.
Yeah.
He chose to walk away and do his own thing. And it was nobody, if one person had followed him, you would have just had 2 lost idiots. If 2 people had followed him, you would have just had 3 lost idiots. So it's stay by the tent. And you're still a lost idiot for that 7 hours, but at least you're by a tent, right?
Yeah. That's
This guy, he just walks away, and I can't remember if we called him or he called us, but the conversation we were having is he was saying, I don't know if anything is real. He's saying, I'm looking at a picture of my family and I don't recognize them. And I'm on the other line with him, and I'm trying to communicate something that's not getting across, which is the duality behind real and unreal is fallacious. It's, as in it's a fallacy.
Okay.
It's, that's probably a wrong word, huh?
No, that's right. But when you said it, it made me think of fellatio.
Like penis? Like sucking penis?
Yeah, sucking dick.
Yeah. Not talking about sucking penis.
Yeah.
There's a fallacy behind thinking that there's a such thing as things being real or unreal. And here's why I'm saying that. Because you just said that when somebody reports that they experience something, you take it as experientially real, epistemologically real.
Yes.
And you don't feel the need to justify to yourself or to them whether it's phenomenologically real or unreal, because, and I don't think that'd be the case if you had never done psychedelics, because there's something about the psychedelic initiation that points out to you through direct experience that the ground of reality, the ground of being, the ground of existence is experience itself, is awareness itself.
Yeah.
So when you experience something, that's reality occurring somewhere in some way. And without that initiation, living in this dualistic, materialistic paradigm that we do in this consensus reality of this time and place, it feels as though if something happens in your head that isn't scientifically verifiable, that is somehow not a real phenomena. Right?
Right. Yeah, that's a common thought. Yeah.
Yeah. And like Jung said, what people fail to understand most out of anything about my work is that I regard the psyche as real. He's trying to get at this truth. And now here's something that's really interesting and trippy about this. Psychedelics proved to me and proved to you and proved to our friend who was lost in the woods that day that it turns out experience is real. Not scientifically verifiable phenomena, but experience, awareness. It exists. It's fundamentally valid. But psychedelics are also proving that to science, because now that we have a field of neuroscience, you can scientifically verify that something occurred in the head. Like when you...
Interesting.
You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So in the same sense, psychedelics prove to me as an individual and you as an individual that the contents of the psyche are real. Psychedelics gave birth to the field of neuroscience that's proving to the Western materialism that the contents of the psyche are real.
And neuroscience meaning like being able to study and in some cases see electricity in the brain,
Correct.
like the way that your neurons connect to each other.
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm not a neuroscientist, so I don't know if they're measuring electromagnetism or radiation or heat. I don't know how they're tracking the movements in the brain.
Yeah.
But the fact that we know there are neurotransmitters that communicate via electrical signals, that different areas of the brain being active in that way correlate with certain kinds of experiences, all of that neuroscience would not exist without LSD. So society is being brought through the same initiation that I'm saying we went through. That's the point that I'm making. And that's really fascinating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Something else about this book. After he goes through his psychedelic experiences, he's really left with a direct understanding that the most important part of the journey is to let go and surrender to the experience. And I learned that on psychedelics, but it's been a while. And that was a really good reminder that when you're on psychedelics, there's no more separation between inside and outside world. And so if you are feeling anxious, anxiety immediately manifests in you and around you simultaneously. It's just all, boom, here it is. This is anxiety.
I agree. Yeah, it feels like your consciousness that you usually think of as being housed within your head or within your body, it's like spilling out of you more widely.
Yeah.
And what you are is less you and more a combination of you and the people and things around you, which can be a different distance depending on like how open you are or how much you are letting go. It's almost like how much are you letting your mind go away from your body? Like how far are you willing to let it go?
What do you mean by that?
Like the more, like I wonder if you can let go more to experience the psychedelic trip more fully, that maybe you spill out of yourself further. That like maybe if you are kind of holding on tight, you are feeling some of like, if someone was feeling anxious near you, that you would feel that more strongly if you let go more than if you were holding on tightly during the, and just telling yourself, this is not real, this will end, this is not, reality is not permanently like this will end eventually. Like if you're saying that, then I feel like maybe you are more within yourself than if you opened more, and that you would feel a stronger psychic connection to the people and world around you if you were to let go more.
Yeah.
And that maybe that equates to like physical distance on some level. Because I have felt when taking psychedelics with other people that I am less me and I am more a mix of all those people. that like we are spilling into each other more than we usually do.
Yeah.
Not that we don't. I think that is something that also is happening all the time, and that the more open you are to that experience, the more it happens all the time, regardless of what you've consumed recently.
Yeah.
But yeah, that you spill out more if you let go more.
There was one person on that trip that I just referred to, that same camping trip, who reacted to the experience by completely imploding. Like, he sat down crisscross applesauce by a fire and looked down and just sat there by himself and just kind of looked at the ground. Mm-hmm. And he still ended up having internal dialogue that was valuable in a sense, but he didn't connect to anyone. And that's kind of what you're describing. Like, he decided to just anchor himself to the ground and just weather the storm rather than open up to the experience. And he didn't have the connection that everyone else did, where it's like, we're looking at each other as brothers, like we've never seen each other before.
Right.
And he is just looking at the ground. There's no exchange. So
I actually remember feeling during that experience, when that person was sort of on the outside, that like, I felt like that's good. Like, it feels like he's like, I feel like that's as close as he wants to be right now. And that's perfectly okay. And that's like exactly the role he should be playing right now. I remember feeling like, although he's not connecting with us as deeply as the rest of us may be connecting with each other, that like, he's okay, and he just needs to revolve a little bit further around us right now before he can like come closer.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think this is something really interesting about the psychedelic experience that makes it valuable to do it blindfolded, is that I'm going to have to go through a weird tangent to get to my point, but I'll get there.
Sure.
So first, I want to propose an idea. There are neuroses and psychoses in the field of psychology, and neuroses are like weird obsessions with things that are physically in your life, and psychosis is like fundamentally it's like a kind of dissociative distance from your individual experience. So somebody who goes completely off the deep end with psychedelics to the point that they find themselves permanently embedded in a kind of psychedelic state, feel as though the life that they're living is not real. And they're just kind of spaced out and distant, like they're floating through the world, and they have this kind of weird, high buzzing anxiety, and they don't feel grounded. Mm-hmm. And then people who have never done psychedelics and who regard them as probably more dangerous than beneficial and feel safe in what they think is grounded reality, but is really a materialism that misses most of reality. Mm-hmm. They are more in the neuroses category, as in they're more likely to get caught up in little bullshit. Like smoking is in the neuroses category. People have psychedelic experiences with the intention of quitting smoking, and they leave the experience, that Michael Pollan documents this, they leave the experience saying that smoking isn't relevant anymore. Like, they've transcended smoking. Not that they did some kind of dramatic internal therapy to combat the issue, but they grew out of it, as though they've expanded to the point that it's too small for them now. Mm-hmm. Something I've noticed about Eastern and Western perspectives on spirituality and cosmology, our relation to life, is that the Western world is in the neuroses category and the Eastern world is in the psychoses category. So, for example, I'm listening to Deepak Chopra the other day on a podcast with Rupert Spira, and both of them are big on non-dual philosophy. Mm-hmm. And Chopra says to Spira, "You can't convince me that I have a mind or I have a body." And he says, when I met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, my guru, in whatever this year, I was studying neurophysiobiology, some string of science, and Maharishi asked me what I was studying. And I told him I was studying the chemical reality of emotions, including dopamine, serotonin, and he named some other chemicals, or chemical transmitters, or whatever that's called. And Maharishi said, "Those aren't real. None of that is real. Study with me instead." And Chopra chuckles, recalling the story, and says that he accepted that invitation. Mm-hmm. I'm listening to that. I'm going, this is a kind of psychosis. This denial that your individuality is real. Because if you say that there is a transcendental unity underlying and encompassing life, and that contacting that is the source of meaning and guidance and permanence and trust and faith and hope and everything good. That kind of spiritual awakening. But then you divide unity from diversity and say unity is real and diversity isn't. You have fallen back into duality again. Whereas if you truly wake up to the unity of life, you will discover that the transcendental unity that is neither nothing nor something and your little temporary relative individual life are all real. It's, oh, wow, all of this is real. You're real. You're my brother. I'm responsible for you. I love you. I owe you something. You matter. This is real. This is valid. I need to go to work. Like, people around me, wow, I'm here. And it's all held by some sacred underlying unity. So the Western world denies transcendental unity, and the Eastern world denies relative temporary diversity. And there are these two polar opposite sicknesses. And so our goal as people who want to grow spiritually is to refuse to do either of those. Refuse to deny. There's a Catholic writer who, Ida something, I can't remember her name right now, IDA something. She writes a book called The Unbearable Wholeness of Being. It's unbearable to really deal with the fact that diversity and unity are both real. It's unbearable. And we're trying to grow into that reality. Now, the point that I'm trying to work towards is that when you're on psychedelics and you witness something happening that is unhealthy, like I think that friend sitting there by himself instead of connecting and having an experience was unhealthy. Part of my argument is that just a couple months later, he completely fabricated, manufactured a conflict with that whole friend group that he had the opportunity to be a part of so that he could go into isolation. If in that psychedelic experience, he had chosen to open up to us and connect with us, maybe that wouldn't have happened. Maybe some healing could have occurred. The purpose of that psychedelic experience was for a group of friends to do something otherworldly together that bonded them like nothing else could. And that happened for me and for you and for the married couple that was with us and for your partner and for that friend who went out in the woods. All of us were closer after that. And that guy wasn't. That guy did his own thing, and that led him down.
I felt that he was, at the end of the day,
closer to us.
Yeah, I felt that like he did have an experience that had connected us at the end of that day.
Yeah,
well, but you have a very good point that like that was very shortly before he had that weird fight and spun off.
Yeah,
yeah,
and the point that I am getting to through that whole weird tangent is this. Insights that occur under the influence of psychedelics can be misleading due to a confusion of levels. From the perspective of transcendental unity, everything is perfectly okay. But from the relative, grounded, temporary perspective of us as diversified and individuated souls who are separate from each other in this sense, something can be deeply unhealthy. But you could see somebody even being murdered or raped. If you were embedded in that transcendental unity, you would go, oh, this is literally the universe playing with itself.
Yeah.
And people who have been through the psychedelic initiation understand what I'm talking about, that there's a cosmic giggle. You look at all the evil in the world and you realize it's all a game that the cosmos is playing with itself. But then to take a realization like that and try to apply it at this relative, temporary, diversified level of being is a confusion of levels. It's like that insight's true there, but it's not true here.
Good point. Yeah.
Like in classical physics and in quantum physics and quantum field physics and unified field physics, there are different sets of numbers that exist and apply or don't exist and apply, and different mathematical laws. And I don't understand what they are, but I can tell you from having my physics teacher, John Hagelin, who was a unified field theorist from Harvard, and I studied consciousness and physics under him at MIU, and he explained this, how there's different mathematical laws and different sets of numbers that exist at these different levels of reality. And in the same sense, there are different philosophical truths. There are different sets of philosophical truths that apply and are valid at different levels. And if you take a transcendental truth and you bring it down to the relative level and try to apply it, you can become a psychopath. And when people have psychedelic experiences and they go in blindfolded and it's all internal. That's how all of the studies in this book were done. And I think there's something really smart about that because you only experience those truths as internal truths. And then when you come out and you have the chance to do coaching and debriefing with somebody who's used to dealing with these altered states and can really dialogue about it, you have a process of walking down so that you can leave what's true there, but take down with you the relative truths that apply here and are inspired by the absolute truths that you witnessed there.
Yeah.
So without somebody to be present with you and ensure that you can safely have a fully internal experience and then debrief the experience with you afterwards, you are at risk of confusing levels and becoming mentally ill as a result of a psychedelic experience. That's one of the things that I learned from this book.
That's a very, I love that blindfold idea and the idea of like making it, sort of separating it from the real world instead of it being like an overlay that's connected to the real world.
The overlay, yes. Yeah. The overlay is where psychosis bleeds in.
Right.
Because you're looking at Max and you're going, that's just fine. No, Raleigh, in transcendental unity, that's just fine. That is a person sinking into a depression that could kill him. Like that person is sinking into isolated depression. But from unity, it's all funny. It's all fun and games. But the next day, he's going to walk around still as isolated as he was the day before, but now maybe lugging around these random transcendental truths that just don't fucking apply.
Right.
You know, and thinking like, how would that guy pass his time? Reading like Chris Hagelin. Like,
you don't mean that. You mean the guy that did the,
yeah, I said Chris Hagelin because I just said John Hagelin.
This highest IQ in America, and he has the theory.
It's a theory of everything. It is Chris H, but I got Hagelin wrong because I was just thinking of John Hagelin. Would you mind looking up Chris H, highest IQ?
Chris Heroin?
So close. He's a horse rancher and a bouncer and a philosopher. Strange character. Highest IQ documented in the United States. Christopher Langan.
Yeah.
So I was wrong about the H. So the H, I was talking about the G when I said the H because there's a G in it and they're right next to each other.
Hagelin and Langan. I see it. You're still smart. You're still a smart guy.
I'm still smart. So he writes these theories about how consciousness and physics and evolution works. And that's all really fascinating. But that young man who we're referring to would spend a lot of his time reading that guy's theories and kind of fooling himself into thinking there was something relevant or useful about him studying a theory of everything.
Yeah.
While he was living by himself in a motel. And it's like, that's not what you need to be reading right now. That's a confusion of levels resulting from that's a confusion of levels, which I believe are psychotic symptoms that resulted from repeated and poorly guided psychedelic experiences for that person. Because now he feels like, what's life really about? This unified consciousness that all operates because God is neither this nor that. And it's like, bro, you should be looking for a job. This is a horrific confusion of levels.
Yeah.
When you take psychedelics and just aimlessly engage with the world, that sort of thing can happen. But when you take psychedelics and you say, go in and follow it wherever it goes, you'll be brought through this kind of crazy archetypal story within you, and then emerge on the other side with something, and then walk down with it with what do they call it? Integration coaching.
Right.
And that's so much more. That's such a more intelligent use of psychedelics. So that's why if someone asked me now, "Hey, I want to do psychedelics," I would say, "Please let me guide you through that. Blindfolds, test the dosage, dimly lit room, praying and meditating beforehand." A day of integration coaching afterwards. We'll make a weekend of it. Please let me take you through this because this can really initiate you or it can really, really, really fuck you up.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, it can end up spinning people into months-long or lifelong just psychosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, that was what triggered my psychosis, was a series of unguided, low-dose psilocybin sessions. So they would tell me these truths, right? These truths would be revealed to me by this psilocybin mushrooms, like you can make what you want out of your life. That's a transcendental truth, not a pragmatic truth. So you take that and you go, I can do whatever I want tomorrow. I'm Jesus. See how that happens?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like that. Yeah. So the scales, the levels of reality at which you operate when you're in an altered state like that are so different than this one. So skip around to another random part of this.
Cool.
This was the only graphic that I marked in the book. This is a map. So this is a map of interconnections observed between different areas of the brain while under psychedelics and not. So you can see here clearly that more regions of the brain are in interconnected communication with one another under psychedelics than when not. Placebo versus psilocybin. This is on a practical level, on a neuroscientific level, why those innovations and creative inspirations happen under psychedelics.
Because that's all the aliens talking there on the right.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that whole subject is so confusing that, there could be entities outside of us interacting with us when we have these experiences. So, these supernatural innovations could happen, because it's like imagine you have 30 people in a room and they speak a total of 10 languages. Mm-hmm. And some of them are engineers, artists, writers, and you tell all of them to try to solve some problem that exists across their fields of study so that they have to collaborate to solve the problem. But there's 30 of them, and they only speak the same language in sets of 3. So 3 engineers speak English, 3 writers speak Chinese, 3 French people are artists, etc. And you got all these people in this room, right? And then for 8 hours, you say, for the next 8 hours, you all speak the same language. What would they come up with in those 8 hours? That's how the innovations happen on psychedelics.
That's a good way to put it.
On a practical neuroscientific level. But there's also a chance that operating at a higher dimension of reality is just a matter of being more interconnected. Mm-hmm. It's like, what's the difference between a bunch of cubes and what would it be called, a decadon or something, like a 5th dimensional cube?
I don't really know what you mean. Like dodecahedron is a 20-sided thing.
How about I use 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional instead of 3-dimensional and 4-dimensional, right? It makes a lot more sense.
You need a time cube.
If you have a time cube, you have a cosmic hourglass. So if you have a bunch of squares on a table, what's the difference between that and a cube? The interconnections between the squares. You pick them up and you connect them all. So could a human being think 5th dimensionally if you simply connected the aspects of the human being differently? That's the theory I'm proposing to explain how entities could be communicated with under the psychedelic experience.
For sure.
But that's like
sense.
way far out. No, that doesn't make it. That might make sense.
Kind of does.
Just speculation and opining. Like there's some reason that entities can be communicated with differently under psychedelics.
Right.
But the fact that people have innovations and inspiration on psychedelics is not a mystery scientifically. We can see the brain is literally more interconnected. And the brain is also more interconnected under meditation, but not to that degree. Not to that degree. But when teachers like Ram Dass say, once you've gotten the call, hang up the phone, what he means is once you have received an insight from psychedelics that inspire you to live your life differently, live your fucking life differently until once you get a glimpse of enlightenment, of a higher way of being, discipline and train yourself until you can organically experience that higher way of being without chemical intervention. Well, you can literally see that happening neuroscientifically. The difference between like the research they're doing at MIU on transcendental meditation, you can clearly see EEG coherence increase over time as someone meditates twice daily across years. You can see it gradually expand. You can observe the brain interconnecting itself more and more over time. And at a certain degree of interconnection, these higher states they speak of occur. Like people stop losing awareness when they fall asleep, which they refer to as cosmic consciousness. So someone is aware while they're dreaming, aware while they're sleeping, aware while they're waking, and there's no break in awareness where it's like, I'm awake, and then what? And now I'm in a dream. What? Now I'm awake again? They don't have that break. once they have reached a certain level of EEG coherence, and that might just be a certain kind of EEG coherence because it's EEG coherence around alpha 1 waves as opposed to EEG coherence around a different kind of wave.
Right. They could be coherent at different frequencies.
Yes, exactly. So mindfulness meditation also increases coherence, but at a different frequency. So MIU's argument is that since alpha 1 waves occur in the moment between sleeping and waking, and alpha 1 waves are associated with self-reflection, those two facts are evidence that alpha 1 coherence is the real samadhi, which is a really great argument and a really strange one. But it's interesting that neuroscientifically you can track what Ram Dass is saying. It'll give you a glimpse of enlightenment, but then you have to meditate and train until you cultivate that within yourself organically. And the fact that that's scientifically verifiable is just crazy.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I wonder if has there been any experiments? I wonder if psychedelics could act as training wheels to show you how to get to that state, and then would somebody that would be learning meditation that has been in an altered state because of psychedelics, would they be more capable of getting there more quickly on a more consistent basis than people who had not had a psychedelic experience?
Yes, 100%.
So it acts as like training wheels that like show you how to do it, and then it gets easier from there.
I don't think the study has been done, but bro, 100%. Like one of the, I don't remember if it was Yale or Duke or some big school, all the divinity students, not all of them, like 10 or 12 of the divinity students were given mushrooms in a chapel. And almost all of them had mystical experiences that they rated the most important experience of their life years later when resurveyed. And Timothy Leary was one of the researchers on that. And I think you've heard of that experiment before.
Sounds familiar.
And these divinity students were people who were vocationally interested in holy, altered, transcendental states of consciousness. They were divinity students. And they had the most impactful experience of their life there. So I don't think it's going far out to say that changed their idea of the real potential of spiritual formation practices.
Right.
What they are, what they can do. It's like...
Right. If they remain, assuming they remain their same religion, essentially, after that experience, then yeah, it does kind of imply that brought them closer to God.
Right.
Of their understanding.
And I don't know. I don't think that was described, whether they changed religious affiliation or not.
Yeah.
But it is truly absurd for us to have, as a country, a body of clergy that are primarily not psychedelically initiated. That is just asinine. It's like, you don't know. Like, you don't know that there's really a world besides this one if you've never directly experienced it. And if you've never done psychedelics, you have almost certainly not directly experienced it. So it's just crazy. It's like, I mean, do you think that's flawed thinking?
I think that if they're very pious and they're very serious about what it is that they're doing, and they are meditating or just trying to connect with God on a regular basis, that I imagine they would reach whatever like coherence is similar to psychedelic experiences. It may be that more than half of them do end up having like a really divine experience with nothing to do with psychedelics, because they spent their life, if we're talking about like people that have dedicated their life to like being like chaste, or is it chaste, and like being just serving the church their whole life. Yeah. I would imagine those people reach that point if they're that serious about it. They probably have a serious prayer practice that would help them get there. It would probably just take significantly longer, but they got all the time in the world.
I agree. Sadhguru said the way to reach enlightenment is to devote yourself wholeheartedly to any one thing. Decide what you are and be that completely. It's like a way of cultivating coherence in your life around some particular wave. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Your wave is Christianity. Your wave is Buddhism. Not even necessarily with a spiritual formation not necessarily with a spiritual technology like prayer or meditation or hypnosis or psychedelics or dreaming or anything. With no technology like that, if you study trying to intellectually understand God every single day, and every aspect of your life becomes organized around your genuine, wholehearted desire to understand God just intellectually, I think that would ultimately result in enlightenment.
Yeah.
But the danger is that if more than 50% of clergy have a sincerely divine experience at some point in their lives, that just means that they had an experience that was sincerely divine or transcendental or non-dual or whatever compared to what they understand reality to be already. So it's like somebody, there's a lot of levels of transcendental experience is what I'm saying. It's like,
Yeah.
like I had the most divine experience of my life yesterday. It's like, well, what does that mean? That's just compared to what you experience anyway.
Right. Unless we're hooking everyone up to EEGs, then we have no real scale to like, decide whether these are similar experiences or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
we don't even know. Like, we may have had wildly different experiences on psychedelics, and like, we can't even really describe. Like, there's this really essential thing that's different about the experiences that we've had.
Right.
But it's just hard to like explain that because we've got different perspectives and there's not words or.
Right.
So the EEG thing is very interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
Very interesting. That like a huge aspect of what I want to do with my career is measure Christ-centered spiritual formation practices scientifically to determine which of them are the most effective, because the physical implications of spiritual practices having physiological correlates are crazy. Like, it's a new kind of...
Say that one more time.
The physical implications of spiritual experiences having physiological correlates are crazy.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
So what is the cosmos made of if meditation results in greater neuroscientific coherence? Like, that's what MIU is doing to validate Vedic theories of consciousness and Vedic theories of divinity. And I'm saying, like, I'm ripping that off 100% to make fresh, because the problem with Christian apologetics is that it doesn't argue for the validity of God as much as it argues for the legitimacy of Christianity. And it's like, fuck that whole thing. We need to have a completely different conversation. What do spiritual formation practices do to people? And what does that say about what a person is made of? And what does that say about what the cosmos is? And how does that verify the existence of God?
Yeah.
Completely different kind of transpersonal apologetics that is not remotely about promoting any particular religious system, but arguing for the fact that the universe is coherent, creative, and intelligent and unified. Let's make that argument. Let's make the argument that everybody is right about God. And part of that is just going to be translating what MIU is saying to a Christian audience is saying here. I mean, theologically, this is the implications of what they've discovered. And we can recreate those effects using Christian spiritual practices. Yeah. So this is all one thing.
You want to be like a neuron that's connecting two different parts of the brain that don't usually connect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When I had the psychosis experience, the psychedelic induced psychosis / spiritual emergency / shamanic initiation, one of the things that kept appearing was, you are the avatar, you are the avatar. It was a reference to my favorite cartoon, and it was saying, there are 4 things that don't communicate with each other that you need to tie together. And so it was physical and natural sciences and Eastern and Western spirituality. But then it was also physics, philosophy, theology, and psychology. And it was just saying, you need to tie all of that together, be the integrative force across these fields. We have an abundance of individualized, specialized experts in academia that don't know what they know means because they don't know what the other academic fields are saying. Now it's time to tie all this together, integrate, tie together, integrate, tie together. And that's exciting. Let's do that. That's all. I guess my last note on the book is that the people who are now on FDA and WHO and NIH boards who are approving psychedelic research again, a lot of them, and that's funny that I'm tying it up this way because this is how the book tied it up too. Timothy Leary gets shit on for the whole book, but at the end they say, look, Timothy Leary's message was, everybody do acid, everybody right now, don't care, let's put it in the tap water. And a lot of people did do acid, at that point because that was the messaging. Everybody do this right now. Not blindfolded, not safely, not alone, not guided. Everybody take it right now. I'm serious. You'll see God. You are God.
Right.
This is all a game.
Right.
All of those people went on that crazy adventure, and now those people who were going on that crazy adventure in their 20s, in the 60s, are now like 70, 80, and they're physicians on boards. On NIH, FDA, WHO boards, not WHO, but NIH and FDA, who are saying there's legitimacy to these substances. We need to study them. There's been some really surprising advocates for psychedelic research, like a cabinet member of Nixon or Reagan, who was meeting with these psychedelic researchers and like, I believe in what you guys are doing. Maybe this could solve people's drug problems, because the research into this, into addiction is just unreal. And it's PTSD, depression, anxiety, and addiction that are, and death anxiety that are primarily being studied. And all the results are promising. And there's some really conservative, powerful people who have even been like, this is wonderful. You guys are really helping people. But a lot of these a lot of these advocates you wouldn't suspect were kids who were tripping and fucking in the 60s. Right. And now they're 80-year-old people on these medical boards who are like, no, let them do the experiment. They'll be safe. Let's regulate it. Now we have 2 American universities with psychedelic-assisted therapy certificates, CIIS in California and Naropa in Colorado. And Harvard is studying them again, and Johns Hopkins is studying them, and Stanford is studying them, and many more. Now we just got the first master's degree that is specifically focused on the science of psychedelics, how psychedelics impact people.
Interesting.
It's a pharmaceutical sciences degree at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And so this field is just about to explode, partially because Timothy Leary just threw a grenade and waited 80 years or 60 years for it to go off. So he did play his part.
Interesting. Yeah.
And at the end of the book, it describes this interesting meeting that happened between Leary. You never found that fourth dude?
I don't know his name. I mean, I got a bunch of names.
But did you look up Harvard Psychedelic 4?
Yeah, like Houston Smith.
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah. He went on to be Huston or Houston Smith, I don't know either. He went on to be the world's leading expert on comparative religion. So, I mean, just between those 4 guys, the impact and Andrew Weil later apologized to Leary and Richard Alpert for being a complete bitch and snitching on them. Alpert held it against him for a long time. Timothy Leary was like, bro, don't remotely care. Everything happens the way it's supposed to. We're still rolling. Didn't care at all.
He was so high.
Yeah. So he backed up his jester act by not taking himself seriously either, which is great. And he did have a long-lasting impact on psychedelics that's maybe more positive than people thought, because maybe the government was going to shut the shit down anyway because they were studying it. This book talks a little about MKUltra, not a lot, but it is now public information that they were doing experiments using LSD, trying to weaponize it. And that blew up in their face because they created crazy geniuses, and that's a whole nother subject. Yeah. But maybe the government was going to say no to it anyway, and Leary got more of it on the streets before they could shut it down. So maybe he had a really positive impact. Maybe it really was shut down because of the wild card that he was that made people really uncomfortable. Who's to say now? But a meeting happened with Smith, Alpert, Weil, Hoffman, Leary, and a bunch of those OG psychedelics guys, like a private meeting in a house. Many, many years after the whole research projects, all of them had been shut down. And Pollan got the footage of that meeting, and everybody was cool. Everybody was cool. Like, Leary had the balls to ask, is there anything we should have done differently? And Hoffman, who despised Leary, was kind of like, nah, man, shit goes the way it goes. Here we are. I mean, yeah, hindsight, could have done things differently, but they were all cool. So
nice.
Here we are at the beginning of the second wave of psychedelic research, way more equipped to integrate spirituality and science into it. So at CIIS and Naropa, for example, to enroll in that certificate, you can be a mental health counselor, a psychiatrist, a nurse, a medical doctor, or you can be a certified and ordained minister and chaplain with an MDiv. So there's serious academic requirements on the spiritual participants, but still they're saying if you're well-trained spiritually, medically, or psychologically, you're eligible. Mm-hmm. That integrative approach to research is really smart. So we're way more equipped to deal with it. We're going to be way safer. We've got way more protocols. We're way more open-minded. We're more evolved consciously than we were in the 60s. And so I think it's going to go just great this time and be really, really healthy and really positive. So really excited for this renaissance.
I hope so. Yeah, I'm optimistic. It does feel like, I do feel sometimes like it feels like we're taking a second run at whatever it was. I don't think it's just about psychedelics. I think it's probably a bigger thing than that. But whatever we as a society were taking a run at in the 60s, like we're taking a run at it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think so.
It's going to be dope.
I think so.
So if you want a very grounded introduction to all of that, How to Change Your Mind, What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. Highly recommend.
Awesome.
Night school.
Night school.